My name is Justine, 33 years old, and at my wedding, my parents handed me an invoice. $380,000 it read for the cost of raising me payable now that I was married. The guests went silent. I looked at the bill, then I handed them an envelope of my own. Funny, I said. I have an invoice too. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The evening had been flawless up until that exact moment. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Country Club was bathed in the warm, golden glow of crystal chandeliers. Soft jazz floated from the live band in the corner, mixing perfectly with the gentle clinking of silverware and the joyful hum of 200 guests. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline sparkled against the dark night sky. I sat beside my new husband Gavin at our sweetheart table, which was draped in white silk and covered in cascading white roses. For the first time in my 33 years of life, I felt completely at peace. I had spent decades playing the role of the invisible daughter, the scapegoat, who was expected to sit quietly in the background while my family celebrated themselves. But tonight was supposed to be mine. Gavin reached over, took my hand in his, and smiled at me with a warmth that made all the stress of the wedding planning simply melt away. That peace shattered the moment I saw my mother and father marching across the polished hardwood dance floor. Linda and Richard did not walk with the joyous, tearful pride of parents approaching their newlywed daughter. They marched with the cold, calculated precision of executives walking into a hostile corporate takeover. My mother wore a rigid silver dress that looked more like armor than celebration attire. Her face was set in a tight, unyielding mask of superiority. Beside her, my father buttoned his tailored suit jacket, his eyes locked onto our table with a predatory focus. There was no warmth in their approach. There were no raised glasses for a toast. As they reached the edge of the sweetheart table, Gavin started to stand up, a welcoming smile forming on his face. He extended his hand to greet my father. Richard completely ignored him. He did not even acknowledge my husband's existence. Instead, my mother stepped forward and slammed a thick black leather binder directly onto my pristine china dinner plate. The heavy thud of the binder echoed loudly, cutting through the soft jazz music. The sound was so aggressive, so jarring, that the guests sitting at the front tables immediately stopped talking and turned to stare. I looked down at the binder, then back up at my mother. I expected a lot of things from them today. I expected passive-aggressive comments about my dress. I expected them to complain about the food. I did not expect this. "It is time to settle your debts, Justine," my mother announced. Her voice was not a whisper. She projected her words clearly and deliberately, ensuring that everyone within a 20-foot radius could hear her. "You are starting a new life today, which means you are officially transferring your liability. We have carried your financial burden for long enough. It is time for you to clear your ledger." I stared at her, genuinely struggling to comprehend the sheer audacity of her words. "Transferring my liability." I repeated, my voice steady but laced with disbelief. "I am your daughter, not a corporate asset." My father stepped forward, pulling a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket and slipping them onto his face with infuriating calmness. He opened the heavy black binder, flipping past a meticulously organized table of contents. "Let us keep emotion out of this, Justine," he said, his tone dripping with businesslike detachment. "We believe in accountability in this family. You have consumed resources for over 2 decades without contributing a single return on investment. This invoice totals exactly $380,000. It is a highly itemized, thoroughly audited account of what you owe us for the privilege of your upbringing." Gavin let out a short, incredulous laugh, clearly thinking this was some bizarre, elaborate joke. "Are you completely serious right now?" he asked, looking between my parents. "You are handing your daughter a bill for her childhood at her wedding reception." "I am speaking to my daughter, Gavin," my father snapped, not even glancing at my husband. He tapped a manicured finger against the top spreadsheet in the binder. "The math is undeniable, Justine. We calculated your exact share of the household grocery bills from the time you transitioned to solid food until you moved out. We included the property tax percentage for the exact square footage of your childhood bedroom. We even factored in the utility increases associated with your daily showers. My mother crossed her arms, a look of profound satisfaction settling over her sharp features. Do not forget the medical expenses, Richard. She looked down at me, her eyes narrowing. $17,000 for your pediatric asthma treatments. We had to sacrifice our own comfort to keep you breathing, Justine. The least you can do is reimburse us for the medication. The front half of the ballroom had gone completely silent. The jazz band faltered, the musicians exchanging confused glances before slowly letting the music fade away. Dozens of eyes were locked on our table. I could see Gavin's parents at table 1, their mouths slightly open in absolute horror. I did not cry. I did not shrink back into my chair. Years ago, a display like this would have crushed me. I would have dissolved into tears, begged for their approval, and apologized for whatever perceived slight had provoked their anger. But I was no longer the frightened little girl desperate for their love. I pushed the heavy binder away, sliding it back across the silk tablecloth until it bumped against my father's hands. You are billing me for my childhood asthma medication, Richard? I asked, dropping the title of Dad entirely. My voice was calm, cutting through the silence of the room with absolute clarity. Is this because you need to cover Cameron's third failed app startup? My mother flinched as if I had struck her. How dare you bring your brother into this? Cameron is a visionary. He is building a legacy. He is building a mountain of debt, I retorted, leaning forward slightly. But let us look at this supposed invoice. I flipped the binder open, glancing at the bottom lines. You are charging me $60,000 for community college tuition. That is fascinating considering I paid for every single credit hour myself by waitressing double shifts. You emptied my college savings account when I was 17 so you could buy Cameron a brand new sports car for his high school graduation. You literally stole the money I saved from my own part-time jobs. You lived under our roof, my father hissed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. The money in that house belonged to the family, and we allocated it where it had the highest potential for success. Cameron needed reliable transportation for his networking events. You were just taking basic prerequisite classes. We owe you nothing. You owe us. Gavin stood up fully now, his tall frame towering over my parents. He placed a protective hand on my shoulder. I think you both need to leave. Right now. You are not going to ruin Justine's wedding day with this delusional extortion attempt. My father looked at Gavin with pure, unadulterated contempt. Then he scoffed a loud, ugly sound that echoed through the quiet room. He turned away from our table and marched directly toward the DJ booth. The DJ, a young guy in a sharp vest, looked terrified as my father approached. Richard did not ask for permission. He reached over the soundboard, flipped the master switch to cut the background ambiance completely, and ripped the wireless microphone from its stand. A sharp squeal of feedback pierced the air, making several guests cover their ears. My father turned to face the entire ballroom, gripping the microphone tightly. The 200 guests, a mix of my chosen friends, Gavin's extended family, and my own toxic relatives, stared back at him in stunned silence. Since my daughter wants to be difficult about honoring her financial obligations to the family that gave her life. My father's voice boomed through the massive speakers bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. Maybe we need some public accountability here tonight. He pointed directly at me, his face twisted in a sneer. Everyone here thinks they are celebrating a wonderful independent woman. But let me tell you the truth about Justine. She is a freeloader. She is a selfish, ungrateful child who took hundreds of thousands of dollars in resources from her mother and me, and now she thinks she can just put on a white dress and walk away from her debts. We sacrificed everything for her, and she sits there refusing to pay us back a single dime. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. I looked at the man who had spent my entire life making me feel small, making me feel like a burden, and demanding I apologize for simply existing. He stood there in his expensive suit, holding a microphone, actively trying to destroy the happiest day of my life, just to satisfy his own ego and greed. He thought he had me cornered. He thought public humiliation would force me to submit just like it always had when I was a teenager. He had no idea what was about to happen next. Richard clears his throat, the sharp sound echoing through the speakers and bouncing off the vaulted ceiling of the ballroom. He flips to the first tab of the thick black binder. The overhead spotlights catch the silver foil of his tie clip. He looks like a CEO, delivering a disappointing quarterly earnings report, completely unbothered by the fact that he is ruining his own daughter's wedding reception. He adjusts his reading glasses. Page 1, line item 4. Orthodontic work, spanning from your 12th to your 14th year. $8,500. He turns the page with a deliberate, crisp snap of the paper. Line item 7. Driving instruction and vehicle insurance premiums during your 16th year. $3,200. A low murmur ripples through the room. 200 guests shift uncomfortably in their gilded Chiavari chairs. I can see my new mother-in-law place a hand over her mouth, her eyes darting between my father and me. Gavin's groomsmen at table 3 exchange bewildered glances. The sheer audacity of the moment hangs heavy over the white floral centerpieces and half-eaten filet mignon. Richard continues, his voice booming relentlessly over the PA system. Page 3. Room and board surcharge. This accounts for your portion of the property taxes on the family estate in the suburbs during your teenage years. A calculated rate of 15% of the total square footage amounting to $24,000. My mother Linda stands just behind his left shoulder. She nods solemnly, playing the role of the aggrieved parent. She dabs at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "We gave up our best years for you," she says, projecting her voice so the microphone picks it up. "We sacrificed our peace of mind. We poured our financial resources into your upbringing, and you walked out the day you turned 18 without looking back." Richard flips to the very back of the binder. He pulls out a summary sheet printed on heavy cardstock. "And finally, we have the emotional distress and family disruption fee. When you abandoned this family at 18, you left a void. You caused your mother severe anxiety. We had to seek counseling. We are assessing a flat fee of $50,000 for the emotional damages you inflicted upon this household. We consider this a transfer of liability. By marrying Gavin today, you are transferring your financial and emotional burden to him. We expect this debt cleared before you leave this venue." The ballroom is dead silent. The kind of silence that feels suffocating, heavy with secondhand embarrassment and shock. Gavin's hand tightens around mine under the table. His knuckles are white. He opens his mouth to speak, ready to tear into my father, but I squeeze his fingers to stop him. This is my battle. I have been fighting it my entire life. I reach across the sweetheart table and pick up the wireless microphone left behind by the best man after his toast. I turn it on. The small green light glows. I stand up slowly, smoothing the skirt of my wedding dress. I do not shake. I do not cry. I look directly into my father's eyes. "You are reading an invoice for my childhood over a loudspeaker," I say, my voice steady, ringing out crystal clear across the silent room. "Let us talk about your accounting, Richard. Let us talk about line item 4. You are charging me $8,500 for braces." I take a slow step out from behind the sweetheart table. My heels click against the hardwood floor. That is a fascinating charge, considering I paid for those braces myself. I paid the orthodontist in cash installments every single month from the time I was 14. I worked closing shifts at the diner on Route 9. I wiped down tables until midnight on school nights just to afford the copays. My father scoffs into his microphone. "We provided the roof over your head so you could save that money. You owe us for the foundational support." "I did not save any money," I correct him instantly. My voice slices through his excuse. "Because the day before my 16th birthday, you and Linda went to the local bank branch. You used your status as a joint signer on my minor savings account to withdraw every single dollar I had earned waiting tables. You took $7,000 of my hard-earned tips." Linda bristles, gripping her designer clutch. "We had family expenses, Justine. We were a unit. You had to contribute. You used my waitressing money to buy Cameron a vintage sports car for his high school graduation, I say, pointing a finger directly at the front row where my brother is sitting. You bought your golden child a classic convertible with the money I saved from cleaning up spilled milk and scrubbing diner floors. And now you have the nerve to bill me for driving lessons I never received. You refused to teach me how to drive because you claimed the insurance was too high. I took the bus to community college every single day. I paid my own tuition. I bought my own textbooks. You did not contribute a single dime to my education. The guests are practically holding their breath. I can see Gavin's father leaning forward, his face flushed with anger on my behalf. My colleagues from the accounting firm are sitting at table 5 watching my parents with absolute disgust. Richard grips the microphone stand tightly, his knuckles turning pale. "You are ungrateful," he barks, his voice echoing harshly. "You abandoned us. You walked out the moment you turned 18 and refused to contribute to the household. That is why you owe the emotional distress fee. You owe your mother for the tears she shed. I walked out at 18 because you demanded I take out a personal loan in my name to cover a second mortgage on your house," I reply, refusing to back down. "You wanted to ruin my credit before I even had a chance to build a life. I left to protect myself from your financial incompetence, and calling it a transfer of liability today, that just proves you never saw me as a daughter. You only ever saw me as an open line of credit." Linda steps in front of Richard, her face twisted in fury. She points a manicured finger at me. "We gave you life. Everything you have is because we brought you into this world. You owe us a return on our investment. We will not be humiliated by a selfish brat who hoards her wealth while her family struggles." "You are humiliating yourselves," I state calmly. "You walked into a room full of decent people and announced that you put a price tag on basic parenting. You are charging me $24,000 for property taxes on a house where my bedroom was literally an unfinished attic space above the garage. You are demanding payment for groceries I barely got to eat because Cameron was always served first." A loud scrape of a chair echoes from the front table. Cameron stands up. He is 36 years old, wearing a tailored, double-breasted suit that screams careless wealth. His hair is perfectly styled. He shoots his cuffs, projecting the air of a highly successful businessman who is merely stepping in to resolve a minor dispute among subordinates. He walks up the steps to the stage, moving with an infuriatingly slow, confident stride. He takes the microphone from his father's hand. Richard willingly steps back, letting his favored son take the spotlight. Linda looks at Cameron with absolute adoration, her angry demeanor melting into maternal pride simply because he walked into her line of sight. Cameron turns to face the crowd. He offers a smooth, apologetic smile to the guests. He runs a hand through his hair, shaking his head as if dealing with an unruly child. "I am so sorry you all have to witness this," Cameron says, his voice dripping with practiced charm and fake empathy. "My sister has always had a flair for the dramatic. She likes to rewrite history to make herself the victim." He turns his attention to me. His eyes are cold, entirely devoid of the warmth his voice projects. "Come on, Justine. Stop embarrassing yourself. Mom and Dad have bent over backwards for you your entire life. They are just asking for what is fair. You sit there in your fancy white dress, drinking expensive champagne, acting like you did everything on your own. It is pathetic." I hold my microphone tightly, waiting for his next move. Cameron thrives on looking like the hero. He needs everyone in this room to believe he is the successful, generous patriarch of the family. "Since you want to be stubborn," Cameron continues, projecting his voice to ensure the entire room hears his supposed generosity. "Let us talk about tonight. Let us talk about this beautiful country club, the open bar, the prime rib dinner. You are acting incredibly entitled for someone who did not even pay for her own wedding." He gestures widely to the opulent ballroom. "Mom and Dad were struggling to cover the costs of this reception because of your demands. So I stepped up. I paid for this venue out of my own pocket to save the family from your embarrassment. I funded your perfect day. And you repay our parents by throwing a tantrum over a completely reasonable invoice." He points directly at me, his face dropping the friendly mask and hardening into an arrogant scowl. "You need to write them a check for the $380,000 right now. You have the money. Stop being a selfish freeloader. Settle your debt tonight, or I will walk over to the event coordinator, cancel the catering, shut down the open bar, and kick everyone out of this building immediately. The threat hangs in the air. The guests exchange nervous glances. Gavin tenses beside me, ready to physically throw Cameron out the nearest window. But I do not panic. I do not feel an ounce of fear. I have spent my entire life preparing for this exact moment. I look at my brother taking in his expensive suit and his hollow threats. I raise my microphone to my lips. You paid for this venue. I ask, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. I let the question hang in the air for a long, agonizing moment. I do not sound angry. I sound profoundly amused. That is a truly fascinating claim, Cameron. It is especially fascinating considering I paid the event coordinator in full with a cashier's check exactly 6 months ago. But please tell us more about your incredible generosity. Cameron's smug smile falters for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovers, puffing out his chest. He leans closer to his microphone. You are lying to save face, Justine. I wired the funds directly to the country club this morning to cover the catering upgrades you demanded. Mom and Dad were in tears over the expense. I stepped in. That is what a real family member does. I protect this family from your greed. I slowly shake my head, feeling a cold, righteous fire burning in my chest. The guests are utterly motionless. Even the waitstaff have frozen by the kitchen doors, holding trays of champagne they are too terrified to serve. You wired the funds this morning, I repeat, nodding slowly as if deeply impressed. A wire transfer. That is remarkable. It is truly a financial miracle, Cameron. Because my phone buzzed with an automated fraud alert at exactly 2:14 this morning. An alert for a credit card that I stupidly allowed you to remain an authorized user on 5 years ago. I take a step away from the sweetheart table, moving gracefully in my heavy white gown, until I am standing directly in the center of the dance floor. I look up at my brother on the stage. My credit card alerts show you tried to charge a $5,000 VIP table at a club in Miami last night, I say, projecting my voice, so every single syllable rings out with devastating clarity. You were attempting to buy premium bottle service while the rest of the family was at my rehearsal dinner. And do you want to know the best part, Cameron? The transaction was declined for insufficient funds. You tried to run the card 3 separate times and it declined every single time. You do not even have $5,000 to your name, let alone the $50,000 it cost to rent this ballroom. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd. I can see Gavin's mother cover her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with shock. My co-workers from the firm, people who deal with financial fraud for a living, are staring at Cameron with unvarnished disgust. The absolute silence of the room makes the collective judgment feel heavy enough to crush him. Cameron turns ash white. The color drains completely from his face, leaving him looking sickly under the bright stage lights. The charismatic, wealthy patriarch routine shatters into a million pieces. He stammers, pulling the microphone away from his mouth and then bringing it back. That is a complete fabrication, he says. But his voice betrays him. It shakes. It lacks the booming authority he possessed just moments ago. It was a corporate expense, a business meeting. The bank flagged it as a security measure because I was traveling. A business meeting at 2 in the morning in a Miami nightclub on a card that you do not even pay the bill for, I ask, stepping closer to the stage. You are wearing a bespoke suit tonight that you rented. I can see the barcode sticker still attached to the inner lining of your left cuff. You flew back from Miami this morning on a budget airline, begged Mom and Dad for cash to rent that suit, and now you have the absolute audacity to stand at my wedding and demand I write a check to cover your failures. Cameron looks wildly toward our parents, his eyes silently begging for a lifeline. He is drowning in front of 200 people, completely exposed as the fraud I have always known him to be. He has spent his entire life being propped up by my parents, shielded from the consequences of his actions, and told he is superior simply because he is the golden child. Now stripped of their financial protection, he has nothing left but empty pockets and lies. Richard rushes forward, grabbing Cameron's arm and pulling him back from the edge of the stage. My father's face is a mask of pure panic and rage. He realizes that their grand plan to publicly shame me into paying their debts has backfired spectacularly. They wanted to make me look like a selfish freeloader, but instead they have exposed their own financial ruin to a room full of highly successful, influential people. "Do not listen to her!" Richard yells into his microphone, his voice sharp and desperate. He points a shaking finger at me. She is trying to deflect. Cameron has millions tied up in illiquid assets. His startup is in a crucial funding round. He is asset-rich, but cash-poor right now because he is reinvesting in the family legacy. You know nothing about high-level business, Justine. You are just a petty, vindictive girl trying to humiliate your brother to avoid paying what you owe. Asset-rich. I counter, a sharp laugh escaping my lips. He does not own a single asset. He lives in a leased condo that you and Linda pay for. He drives a leased car that is 3 months behind on payments. The only reason you brought that invoice tonight is because the bank is threatening to foreclose on your own house to cover the business loans you co-signed for him. You are not here demanding payment for my childhood. You are here begging for a bailout because your golden child bankrupted you. The murmurs in the crowd grow louder. The whispers are no longer hidden. Guests are actively leaning across their tables, completely captivated by the unraveling of the Wilson family facade. I lock eyes with my father. He is breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored suit. He looks like a cornered animal. For the first time in my life, Richard does not look powerful. He looks small, desperate, and entirely defeated. But the confrontation is not over. While Richard and Cameron stand paralyzed by the public exposure of their financial collapse, my mother steps out from the shadows of the stage. Linda does not look panicked. She looks dangerous. The pristine country club facade she has maintained for decades cracks, completely revealing the venomous, calculating woman beneath. She marches past Richard, roughly shoving him aside. She does not bother asking for the microphone. She does not care about the audience anymore. She only cares about regaining control and inflicting pain. "We did not want to do this, Justine," Linda hisses. Her voice is not amplified by the speakers, but the room is so deathly quiet that her words carry perfectly to where I stand on the dance floor. She snaps open her silver designer clutch. Her manicured fingers dive inside and pull out a thick, folded legal document. She holds it up in the air, her knuckles white as she grips the heavy parchment paper. Her eyes are blazing with a terrifying, triumphant malice. "You leave us no choice," my mother snarls, descending the first 2 steps of the stage to loom over me. "You want to stand here and act like you are untouchable. You want to mock your brother and disrespect the parents who sacrificed everything for you. You think you are so smart marrying a man with money and buying a beautiful new house in the suburbs?" Gavin steps up right beside me, his presence a solid, comforting wall of support. He glares at my mother, but she ignores him entirely. Her crosshairs are locked solely on me. "You refuse to pay what you owe us." Linda continues, her voice dripping with poison. "You refuse to settle your debts and honor your obligations to this family, but we are not going to let you walk away and leave us to drown. Since you will not cooperate voluntarily, we have already taken what is rightfully ours." She shakes the legal document in the air, the heavy paper crinkling sharply in the tense silence. "We placed a commercial real estate lien on your and Gavin's new house yesterday afternoon," my mother announces, a twisted, victorious smile spreading across her face. A collective gasp erupts from Gavin's family table. Gavin stiffens, his entire body going rigid with shock. He looks at me, then back at the document in my mother's hand. Placing a lien on a property we had literally closed on less than a month ago seems impossible, a legal nightmare that threatens to destroy the foundation of our new life before it has even begun. My mother takes one final step down to the dance floor, closing the distance between us until she is standing just inches away. She leans in, her voice dropping to a harsh, vindictive whisper meant only for Gavin and me. "The bank approved it yesterday," she says, her eyes gleaming with malice. "You owe us $380,000, Justine, and until that debt is paid in full, your perfect little dream house belongs to us." The air in the grand ballroom turns ice cold. The suffocating silence that follows my mother's declaration is absolute, broken only by the sharp, ragged intake of breath from Gavin's mother at table 1. Gavin physically steps in front of me, his broad shoulders shielding me from my parents. I can see the muscles in his back tense under his tailored tuxedo jacket. His jaw is set so tightly I can hear his teeth grinding together. He reaches out and snatches the heavy parchment document directly from my mother's hand. Linda does not fight him for it. She simply releases the paper and smooths the front of her silver dress, her smile widening into something grotesque and triumphant. She looks around the room, making eye contact with the stunned guests, absorbing their shock, as if it were a standing ovation for her brilliance. Gavin scans the heavy legal paper, his eyes darting back and forth across the dense formal paragraphs. I watch the color completely drain from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He looks back at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and terror. It is real. It is a certified copy of a commercial loan agreement. Right there on the final page, bolded under the section detailing hard asset collateral, is the exact address of the 4-bedroom colonial we closed on just 3 weeks ago. We painted the living room walls together last Sunday. We planted blue hydrangeas by the front porch. It is our sanctuary, our fresh start, and my mother has just dropped it into the middle of a war zone. How did you even accomplish this? Gavin demands, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrates through the silent room. My name is on that deed too. You cannot leverage a marital property without both signatures. You cannot secure a commercial business loan against a residential property without a title insurance company flagging the transaction. This is impossible. My mother waves her hand dismissively, clearly thrilled to have an audience for her own perceived genius. Oh, please, Gavin. Do not bore me with tedious real estate trivialities. We retained excellent legal counsel for this maneuver, and we had something much more powerful than a simple forged signature. We had absolute legally binding authority over my ungrateful daughter. She turns her predatory gaze back to me, her eyes glittering under the crystal chandeliers. You really should pay closer attention to the binding legal documents you signed, Justine. I step around Gavin gently but firmly, pulling the document from his trembling hands. I recognize the embossed seal at the top right corner. It is from a prominent commercial bank downtown, an institution known for aggressive lending practices. I flip past the loan origination details and look directly at the authorization page. There is my signature, or rather a reproduction of my signature signed officially by my mother as my legally appointed proxy. My mind races backwards, sifting rapidly through thousands of memories, trying to find the exact moment I handed this woman the keys to my financial ruin. Then it hits me with the devastating force of a freight train. The hospital. I am 18 years old. I am lying in a sterile, brightly lit emergency room bed, my throat rapidly swelling shut from a severe allergic reaction to a shellfish dish my mother insisted I eat at a family dinner despite knowing my allergies. I was terrified, struggling to pull air into my lungs, my skin breaking out in furious hives. I was hooked up to IV lines and heart monitors that beeped frantically. Linda was standing directly over my bed, blocking the doctors shoving a heavy clipboard into my shaking hands. She told me it was standard hospital admission paperwork. She told me the hospital administration required my signature immediately before the doctors were legally allowed to administer the life-saving epinephrine. I signed blindly, tears streaming down my face, desperate for air, desperate to survive. You used the power of attorney from the hospital. I state, the realization tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. You kept a broad power of attorney from when I went into anaphylactic shock 15 years ago. Linda claps her hands together, once a sharp ringing sound that echoes across the dance floor. Exactly, she cheers, her voice sickeningly sweet. You were barely a legal adult. I told the hospital administration you were incapacitated and unable to advocate for yourself. I had our family lawyer draft a durable general power of attorney rather than a standard limited medical proxy. That document granted me sweeping absolute control over your financial assets, your real estate transactions, and your legal decisions. And you were so desperate to breathe, you signed it without reading a single word. She takes a triumphant step back, linking her arm tightly through Richard's. You never revoked it, Justine. You moved out. You cut us off financially, you went to college, you built your little accounting career, and you never once filed the required paperwork to officially dissolve my authority. Legally speaking, I still hold the pen to your entire life. Richard steps forward again, eager to take back the reins of the confrontation. He adjusts his tie, puffing out his chest, completely unashamed of the crime he is confessing to in a room full of witnesses. Cameron needed capital, Richard explains loudly, speaking to the crowd, as if this justifies committing a massive felony. The venture capital firms were being completely unreasonable regarding his new business model. The banks refused to extend his corporate credit lines without hard tangible assets backing the loans. We had already leveraged our own home to the absolute maximum limit. We had to protect the family legacy at all costs. You were sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars in sudden home equity with your new purchase. It was just sitting there doing absolutely nothing for the family. So we put it to work. We used your mother's power of attorney to sign on your behalf as a silent guarantor. We secured a $1.2 million commercial loan for Cameron's holding company 24 hours ago. The sheer magnitude of their crime settles heavily over the sweetheart table. I look down at the heavy document in my hands. The authorized signatures, the official notary stamps the raised bank seals. They actually went through with it. They walked into a commercial bank and weaponized my teenage medical emergency from 15 years ago to steal my marital home. My mother is practically vibrating with glee, her eyes wide and manic. My father looks like a conquering general surveying a defeated territory. Cameron stands right behind them on the stage, his shoulders relaxed now that the blame and the financial pressure have shifted completely back to me. They expect me to collapse. They expect me to fall to my knees in my wedding dress and beg for mercy in front of my husband and my friends. They expect me to pull out a pen and write the check for their absurd $380,000 invoice just to make this legal nightmare stop. I do not fall. I straighten my spine. I grip the wireless microphone tightly in my right hand. The guests are frozen, completely captivated by the unfolding disaster their dinner's forgotten. I look directly at my parents, dropping any remaining pretense of being a shocked, victimized bride. You used a 15-year-old medical POA to authorize a commercial real estate lien behind my back. I ask, my voice unnervingly calm, projecting cleanly across the massive ballroom without a single tremor. Do you have any idea what the penalty for mortgage fraud is? Richard scoffs, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. He does not care about the legal terminology or the potential consequences. He only cares about the trap he has successfully sprung. His arrogance blinds him to the very real danger he has just placed himself in. It does not matter what you try to call it, Justine. Richard smirks, entirely confident in his leverage. The bank already approved it. The funds have been dispersed into Cameron's corporate accounts. You are completely trapped. Pay the $380,000 invoice right now, or we let Cameron default on the loan tomorrow, and the bank seizes your dream home. The air in the ballroom drops 10 degrees. The silence is no longer just shocked. It is utterly suffocating. For a fraction of a second, my mother stands there basking in the toxic glory of her announcement. She expects me to break. She expects me to crumble to the floor of this lavish country club, in my white gown, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of losing my dream home washes over me. She wants me to beg. She wants Gavin to panic and demand that I write the check to save our future. Instead, Gavin moves. He does not hesitate. He does not ask me if what she is saying is true. He drops my hand, his chair scraping violently against the polished hardwood floor as he stands up. He steps around the edge of the sweetheart table, completely ignoring the heavy binder my parents threw onto my plate. With a swift, decisive motion, Gavin places his tall, broad frame directly between my mother and me. He physically shields me from her line of sight, creating an impenetrable wall of solid black tuxedo and unwavering loyalty. My mother takes a startled step back, clearly caught off guard by the sudden physical barrier. She is used to men who back down, men like my father, who enable her, or men like Cameron who hide behind her. She is not used to a man who steps into the line of fire without a second thought. Richard sees my mother falter and immediately steps forward to flank her. He puffs out his chest, attempting to use his height and his expensive suit to physically intimidate my husband. He squares his shoulders, looking Gavin up and down with an expression of profound, sneering pity. "You need to step aside, son," my father says, his voice dripping with condescension. He speaks into his microphone, ensuring every guest hears him belittle the groom. "This is family business. But since you are officially tied to her now, you need to listen very carefully. You made a terrible investment today, Gavin. You thought you were marrying an independent woman, but you married a liability. She is a financial anchor, and she is going to drag you straight to the bottom." Gavin does not move a single inch. His jaw is locked, the muscles twitching violently under his skin. Richard takes another step closer, lowering his voice into a harsh, commanding tone, the tone he uses to break junior executives at his firm. "I suggest you handle your wife, Gavin. You need to talk some sense into her right now. Make her write the check for the $380,000. If you do not force her to settle this invoice tonight, that lien becomes permanent. Cameron will default on his commercial loan tomorrow morning, and the bank will immediately seize your new property. Your credit score will be destroyed before you even return from your honeymoon. Your ability to buy a house, get a car loan, or build any sort of life will be completely eradicated. Handle her or say goodbye to your future." I watch my husband from behind his shoulder. I see the tension radiating through his back. I know how much that house means to him. We spent 2 years saving every spare dime for the down payment. We spent the last 3 weekends painting the living room and picking out furniture. For a normal groom, the threat of instant financial ruin on his wedding night would be enough to cause a total breakdown. But Gavin is not like the men in my family. Gavin stares directly into my father's eyes. He does not look at the microphone. He does not care about the audience. He speaks with a low, dangerous intensity that carries perfectly through the dead, silent room. "I do not care about the house," Gavin says, his voice like grinding stone. "I do not care about the credit score, and I certainly do not care about your pathetic extortionist threats. You are sick. Both of you are deeply, fundamentally sick. You came to your own daughter's wedding to emotionally terrorize her and steal from her." My father blinks, clearly shocked that Gavin is not immediately turning on me to save his own skin. "You need to leave," Gavin commands, his voice rising, echoing across the floral centerpieces and the stunned faces of our guests. "I want you, your wife, and your fraud of a son out of this building right now. Turn around and walk out those doors before I have the venue security drag you out by your collars. Leave the premises." Richard stares at Gavin for a long, heavy moment. Then my father tips his head back and laughs. It is a loud, grating, ugly sound that slices through the tension in the room. He shakes his head, looking at Gavin with sheer mockery. "You are going to kick us out?" Richard asks, raising his microphone back to his mouth, ensuring his triumph is broadcast to the entire room. "You think you have the power to kick us out? You naive, foolish boy. You cannot kick us out. We hold the keys to your entire future. We literally own the roof over your head. We control your assets. You are going to leave this expensive party tonight and go back to a house that legally belongs to my son's holding company. You have absolutely no leverage here." Cameron smirks from the stage, adjusting his cuffs again, looking immensely pleased that his father has successfully threatened his new brother-in-law into submission. Linda stands tall, her chest puffed out with victory, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of total control. They believe they have won. They believe the trap has snapped shut, and there is no escape. Gavin turns his head slightly, looking over his shoulder at me. His eyes are filled with fierce protectiveness, but there is a deep underlying panic hiding just beneath the surface. He expects me to be hyperventilating. He expects me to be sobbing into my hands, crushed by the realization that my parents have successfully stolen our home and weaponized my medical history to do it. He expects to have to catch me as my knees give out. But as he looks down at me, his expression shifts from panic to utter confusion. I am completely calm. I am not crying. I am not shaking. I am sitting perfectly still, breathing evenly, my posture completely relaxed. The frantic, desperate energy that usually defined my interactions with my family is entirely gone. The terrified little girl who signed that medical proxy 15 years ago no longer exists. I give Gavin a tiny, reassuring nod. He reads my eyes, sees the absolute cold certainty burning there, and he slowly steps aside, giving me the floor. I reach down beside my chair. My fingers brush against the cool silk of my beaded bridle clutch. I unlatch the clasp. I do not pull out a checkbook. I do not pull out a tissue to wipe away tears. I pick up my wireless microphone. I stand up, stepping forward until I am standing shoulder to shoulder with Gavin, facing the three people who have made my life a living nightmare. I look at my mother, who is still clutching the forged commercial loan agreement, as if it is a winning lottery ticket. I look at my father, who is wearing a smug, victorious sneer. I look at Cameron, who is trying his best to look like a tragic martyr. They have spent my entire life underestimating me. They never asked me what my major was in college. They never asked what I did at my firm. They knew I worked in finance, and they assumed I was a low-level bookkeeper, a glorified calculator who pushed papers across a desk for a meager salary. They never cared enough about me as a human being to actually learn what I did for a living. I raise the microphone to my lips. My voice rings out sharp and precise, shattering their illusion of control. You used a 15-year-old medical power of attorney to authorize a commercial real estate lien behind my back, I say, stating the facts of their crime aloud for the entire room to hear. You walked into a federally insured bank and committed mortgage fraud using my stolen identity. Richard rolls his eyes, letting out a heavy sigh into his own microphone. Stop throwing around legal buzzwords you do not understand, Justine. The bank processed it. It is done. Write the check. I tilt my head, a slow, freezing smile spreading across my face. It is a smile that makes my mother take an involuntary step backward. Do you know what I actually do for a living, Richard? I ask, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal weight that finally makes the smirk slide off my father's face. You never bothered to ask. You just assumed I was a nobody. But let me formally introduce myself. I step forward, the spotlight catching the intricate beadwork of my gown. I am a senior forensic accountant. I announce the title echoing off the walls. I specialize in corporate embezzlement, asset recovery, and wire fraud. My entire career is dedicated to dismantling shell companies, tracking stolen funds, and sending arrogant, careless white-collar criminals to federal prison. Cameron takes a sudden, sharp step back on the stage, his foot slipping slightly off the edge of the riser. The color begins to drain from my mother's face. Richard's jaw tightens, a flicker of genuine doubt, finally breaking through his arrogant facade. And you, I say, pointing directly at my father, just confessed to committing wire fraud, mortgage fraud, and identity theft against a woman who builds federal prosecution cases for a living. I reach back into my bridle clutch. I bypass my lipstick and my mirror. My fingers close around a thick, heavy package. I pull it out and hold it up for the entire ballroom to see. It is a large, sealed manila envelope bulging with hundreds of pages of highly sensitive financial documents. You marched into my wedding reception and brought an invoice for my childhood, I say, my voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable authority. I drop the heavy envelope onto the sweetheart table next to their pathetic black binder. The heavy thud sounds like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. Funny, I say, locking eyes with my terrified brother. I brought 9 years of receipts for your felonies. The thick manila envelope hits the white tablecloth with a heavy, satisfying thud. I slide my manicured finger under the flap and tear it open. The sound of ripping paper is amplified by the absolute silence of the ballroom. 200 guests are holding their breath. My mother's triumphant smirk is beginning to curdle into confusion, the edges of her smile trembling as she watches my hands. She expected panic. She expected tears. The calculated surgical precision of my movements is scrambling her brain. My father's eyes dart between the envelope and my face. He is a man who respects power, and he is suddenly realizing he might not be the most powerful person in the room. Cameron shifts his weight on the stage behind them, the first bead of sweat breaking out on his forehead. The rented fabric of his suit suddenly looks cheap under the harsh overhead lighting. I pull out a dense stack of paper stapled and tabbed with bright red and yellow markers. The weight of the documents feels perfect in my hands. This is my domain. This is where I am untouchable. I slide the top document across the sweetheart table. It glides over the white linen and stops right against the base of my mother's silver clutch. You assumed I was ignorant, I say, my voice steady, conversational, and utterly terrifying in its calm. You assumed that because I was 18 and fighting for my life in an emergency room, I would never circle back to check my own legal standing. You assumed a scared, suffocating teenager would remain a scared, ignorant adult forever. That is the problem with arrogance, Richard. It makes you sloppy. I discovered that active power of attorney 9 years ago during a routine deep dive background check for my CPA licensing. My mother scoffs, though her voice is noticeably thinner. Her manicured fingers twitch toward the paper, but she pulls them back as if the document is on fire. If you knew about it, you would have dissolved it. You are lying. You were too stupid to catch it. You are just trying to buy time. I rest my hands flat on the table, leaning in just a fraction. I did not dissolve it, Linda, because a revoked power of attorney is just a piece of paper in a file cabinet. It offers no protection, only a warning that you were caught. But an active, unrevoked power of attorney in the hands of desperate, financially illiterate people, that is a honeypot. The guests from my accounting firm at Table 5 are practically vibrating with anticipation. I can see my managing partner nodding slowly, a vicious grin spreading across his face. He knows exactly what I did. I left it active intentionally. I continue holding my mother's gaze until she is forced to look away. I weaponized it. I placed a permanent maximum security fraud alert and a priority monitoring tripwire on my social security number. I tied it directly to a system that monitors unauthorized proxy utilization. If anyone attempted to use that specific document to leverage my credit or access my assets, I would not just get a standard email notification. The fraud division of the bank would get an automatic unblockable alert, and my personal contacts at the federal level would be notified instantly. You did not trap me today. You walked blindly into a cage I built for you almost a decade ago. I peel the next document from the stack. It is a stark white page with heavy black redaction blocks and an unmistakable federal crest printed at the top. I slide it deliberately toward my father. The lien was never processed, I state, watching the words physically strike my father like stones. The bank did not approve your commercial loan. The transaction portal you used yesterday afternoon was allowed to temporarily mimic an approval status under the strict direct guidance of federal investigators who have been looking into Cameron's shell companies for 6 months. Richard's face drains of all remaining color. The arrogant flush of his cheeks vanishes, replaced by an ashen, sickly gray. He stares at the paper, but refuses to touch it. His hands, previously gripping the microphone stand like a weapon, fall limply to his sides. "What are you talking about?" Richard croaks, the booming, authoritative CEO voice completely vanished. His vocal cords sound like dry paper. "This is a trick. I saw the confirmation screen. The funds were queued for disbursement. They needed you to commit the act," I explain, speaking slowly and clearly, as if I am lecturing a particularly slow intern at my firm. A failed attempt is just a misdemeanor. A completed transaction is a federal mandate. They needed the digital signature. They needed you to authorize the transfer of leveraged funds across state lines into Cameron's corporate accounts. By executing that loan application yesterday and attaching my property as collateral without my direct present consent, you committed federal wire fraud and mortgage fraud. You handed the authorities the exact smoking gun they needed to wrap up a massive ongoing investigation. Gavin stands beside me, perfectly still, radiating a terrifyingly calm strength. He already knew. I had told him everything the moment the priority fraud alert hit my secure phone line yesterday afternoon. We spent the night before our wedding, not panicking, not fighting, but quietly preparing for this exact confrontation. We knew they would try to use it as leverage to ruin our reception. We just let them dig their own graves. Cameron steps forward, violently pushing past our mother. The charismatic mask has completely melted away. He looks like a cornered, terrified animal. He is sweating profusely now, the stage lights reflecting off the heavy sheen on his forehead and upper lip. He looks around the room, his eyes darting frantically. "What investigation?" Cameron demands, his voice cracking, pitching upward in panic. You are making this up. You do not have federal contacts. You are an accountant. You are just a glorified bookkeeper. You cannot orchestrate something like this. I turn my gaze to my brother. He has always been the golden boy, the untouchable prince of the family. He has lived his entire life shielded from consequence, told that his failures were just stepping stones to greatness, funded by the blood and sweat of everyone around him. Right now, stripped of his parents' protection and exposed to the harsh light of reality, he is nothing. Federal investigators have been tracking your capital for half a year, Cameron. I say, my voice ringing with cold, hard facts. I pull a thick-bound report from the stack and drop it onto the table. It lands with a heavy smack that makes my mother jump. You have been funneling dummy investor money through 3 different LLCs registered in Delaware. You have been using those funds to pay off personal offshore gambling debts and fund a lavish lifestyle you cannot actually afford. It is a textbook Ponzi structure, and it is collapsing. When the walls started closing in and your initial investors demanded their quarterly returns, you panicked. You went to mom and dad crying poverty, spinning a lie about a crucial funding round. And they were so eager to protect their golden child, so desperate to maintain the illusion of your success, they were willing to steal my house to bail you out. Cameron's breathing becomes ragged, his chest heaves under the rented suit. He looks wildly out at the audience, suddenly realizing that his potential investors, his country club friends, and his business partners are all sitting at these tables. They are listening to every single word. The entire illusion of his success, the fake empire he built on lies and stolen money, is burning to the ground in front of a live audience. He is watching his social and professional life evaporate in real time. "These are fakes!" Cameron yells, his voice pitching into a hysterical, desperate shriek. He lunges forward, his arms stretching violently across the sweetheart table, his fingers clawing desperately to snatch the bound report out of my hand. "You are bluffing to save face. You printed this garbage off the internet to humiliate me." Gavin's hand shoots out like lightning. He catches Cameron's wrist mid-air, his grip snapping shut like a steel vise. Gavin does not raise his voice. He does not even blink. He simply twists Cameron's wrist downward just enough to make my brother gasp in sharp, sudden pain, forcing him to immediately step back. "Do not reach across this table again," Gavin warns, his voice low and devoid of any mercy. Cameron yanks his arm back, cradling his wrist against his chest. He stares at Gavin with wide, terrified eyes, then looks back at me, his chest heaving with exertion and terror. "It is a bluff," he screams, trying to rally his shattered dignity, looking toward our father for help. "You are a liar, Justine. Tell them she is a liar." I smile coldly. I do not raise my voice. I do not need to. The truth is doing all the heavy lifting for me. I tap the thick bound report sitting on the table with one perfectly manicured fingernail. Turn to page 4. "Cameron," I say, my words slicing cleanly through the suffocating air of the ballroom. "Let us talk about the missing retirement funds." I flip open the heavy cover of the bound report, the sharp crack of the binding echoing like a gunshot in the silent ballroom. I slide the first page out my fingers, tracing the meticulously organized columns of numbers and dates. I do not look at my parents right away. I let the anticipation stretch, allowing the sheer terror of the unknown to wrap around their throats. Let us start with 2016. I say, my tone conversational, as if I am presenting a quarterly review in a boardroom rather than dismantling my family at my own wedding reception. "Richard, you took an early withdrawal of $200,000 from your primary retirement account. You incurred a massive penalty for pulling that money out before you were of age. 6 months later, you and Linda took out a second mortgage on the house you are currently trying to charge me property taxes for. Another $300,000 extracted purely from the equity of your home." I slide the bank statements across the table. They glide over the white linen and stop just short of my father's clenched fists. "You filed federal tax returns for the next 8 years, claiming these massive repeated withdrawals were legitimate venture capital injections into Cameron's technology startup." I continue reading the exact codes from the IRS forms, highlighted in yellow marker. You categorized offshore wire transfers as research and development expenses. You claimed exorbitant travel dining and luxury car leases as operational overhead for a company that was supposedly on the verge of revolutionizing the software industry. My father's mouth opens, but no sound comes out. His eyes are locked on the highlighted bank statements, his pupils dilated in pure panic. He knows exactly what those documents are. He knows I have pulled the curtain back on a decade of federal tax evasion. But the most interesting part of this forensic puzzle is not the tax fraud I say, stepping slightly closer to the stage where my brother is practically hyperventilating. The most interesting part is where the money actually went. I pull a second stack of papers from the envelope. These feature large bolded logos from international banking institutions and gaming commissions. You do not have a startup. Cameron, I state clearly, looking directly into his terrified, sweaty face. You have not had a registered operational business entity in exactly 4 years and 2 months. Your corporate charter in the state of Delaware was formally revoked because you failed to pay a standard $300 annual franchise tax. You have no employees. You have no payroll. You have no product. You have been playing a highly successful CEO for half a decade while possessing absolutely nothing but a hollow shell company. Cameron shakes his head frantically, holding his bruised wrist against his chest. He steps backward, bumping into the microphone stand and sending a loud, screeching feedback noise through the speakers. He winces, looking out at the audience, his eyes darting from face to face, begging someone to intervene. But no one moves. The guests are utterly mesmerized by the spectacular destruction of the golden child. You funneled every single cent your parents gave you into high-stakes sports betting syndicates and offshore poker accounts, I declare, dropping the betting ledgers onto the table. Every time you claimed you needed a capital injection to secure a new server farm, you were actually covering massive gambling losses in Macau. Every time you claimed you were flying to Miami to court new angel investors, you were sitting at VIP tables throwing thousands of dollars at roulette wheels to chase your losses. You did not build a legacy. You built a gambling addiction funded entirely by your parents' retirement accounts. The ballroom remains dead silent. I can hear the hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. I glance at table 5, where the senior partners of my accounting firm are seated. They are watching me with expressions of profound professional respect. They know exactly how difficult it is to trace offshore syndicates, and they are watching their junior partner execute a flawless takedown. Richard grips the edge of the sweetheart table, his knuckles turning entirely white. His chest heaves as he looks from the betting ledgers to his son. The realization is finally hitting him. The empire he thought his son was building, the legacy he had staked his entire financial future and his very freedom upon, was nothing more than a delusion. He had bankrupted himself to fund a gambling habit. "You lied to me," Richard whispers, his voice devoid of a microphone, but loud enough for the front row to hear. He stares at Cameron, his face twisting into a mask of sudden violent betrayal. "You told me the software was in beta testing. You told me you just needed a bridge loan to clear the final development hurdles." Cameron stammers, taking another step back. "I was going to pay it back. Dad, I had a system. I just hit a bad streak, but I was one big win away from clearing the debt and actually funding the project. I swear, you idiot." Richard breathes the word, escaping him like a curse. While my father's reality shatters, my mother's survival instincts finally kick in. Linda cannot handle being the villain. She cannot handle being publicly exposed as a fraud, an enabler, and a terrible mother. She requires an immediate escape hatch, and she defaults to the only tactic she has ever known. She makes herself the victim. Linda presses a hand to her chest. Her face contorts perfectly, her eyes welling with instantaneous tears. Her lower lip trembles and she lets out a loud theatrical sob that echoes through the room. She drops the forged commercial loan agreement onto the floor and covers her face with both hands, weeping loudly. "How could you?" Linda cries, dropping to her knees so she is eye level with the edge of my table. She looks up at me, mascara running perfectly down her cheeks, playing to the audience behind me. "We are your parents. You cannot do this to us. We gave you everything. We raised you. We gave up our best years to put a roof over your head, and you humiliate us like this on your wedding day. You are destroying your own family over money." She reaches out her hand, grasping at the skirt of my wedding dress, trying to pull me down into her emotional collapse. Gavin steps forward to intercept her, but I hold up a hand, stopping him. I look down at the woman who spent 30 years making me feel completely worthless. I do not feel a shred of pity. I do not feel any guilt. I feel absolutely nothing but cold clinical precision. "You raised a scapegoat to deflect from your own failures," I say, cutting off her theatrical sobbing instantly. My voice is flat, hard, and devoid of any emotional vulnerability. "You needed a punching bag. You needed someone to belittle and critique so you could ignore the fact that your favorite son was draining your bank accounts dry. You projected all of your financial anxiety, all of your incompetence, and all of your deep-seated insecurity onto me. You spent my entire life calling me a failure because you were too terrified to look at the massive gaping hole in your own lives." Linda gasps, pulling her hand away from my dress as if she has been burned. She stares up at me, her mouth hanging open, the fake tears drying up instantly when she realizes the audience is not buying her performance. The guests are looking at her with revulsion. They see her exactly for what she is. "You thought I was the weak link in this family?" I continue, staring down at her. "You thought because I did not demand expensive cars or beg for bailouts that I was pathetic. You just did not realize the scapegoat was the one keeping the wolves from eating you." I gesture to the massive stack of forensic evidence sitting on the table. "If you had just left me alone, if you had just walked into this reception, eaten your dinner and gone home, this file would have stayed locked in my office safe. I built those tripwires to protect my own credit, but I kept my mouth shut about your tax fraud because I did not want to send my own parents to federal prison. I was willing to let you drown quietly in the mess you created, but you could not do that. You had to come here and try to steal my home. You had to try and ruin my husband's future. You brought the wolves directly to my front door." My mother slowly stands up, her knees shaking. The reality of federal prison is finally penetrating her thick skull. She looks at Richard, her eyes wide with genuine, uncalculated terror. "We are going to lose the house," she whispers, her voice cracking. "We are going to lose everything." Richard suddenly snaps. The terror gives way to blind, irrational fury. He refuses to accept total defeat. He refuses to be the man who lost everything in front of 200 influential guests. He slams his fist down onto the sweetheart table, making the champagne glasses rattle and the silverware clink against the china. He glares at me, his face turning an angry mottled purple. "You think you have destroyed us?" Richard yells, spittle flying from his lips. "You think one fake business and some tax issues are going to ruin me? I am a senior executive. I have built relationships you cannot even comprehend. We still have our private investors. We do not need your house, Justine. We have venture capitalists who believe in our family legacy. They will bridge the gap. They will cover Cameron's losses and restructure the debt. You have exposed nothing but your own petty vindictiveness." He points a finger directly at Gavin. "And you, boy. You think you are safe because the lien did not clear. I will make it my personal mission to ensure you never work in this city again. You messed with the wrong family. We have backing you cannot even dream of." I watch my father rant and rave, clinging desperately to his final imaginary lifeline. I wait for him to finish his tirade. I let the silence stretch out for a long, agonizing second, letting his hollow threats settle over the room. Then I reach into the very back of the manila envelope. I pull out a single crisp sheet of paper. It is not a bank statement or a betting ledger. It is a formal corporate disclosure form. I slide the paper forward. It glides perfectly across the table, stopping directly over the pile of Cameron's gambling debts. "Let us talk about Vanguard Holdings, LLC." I say, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. "Let us talk about your primary angel investor." Richard stares at the single sheet of paper. His eyes dart back and forth across the black ink. He recognizes the letterhead immediately. It is the same letterhead that has been arriving in his private secure mailbox for the last 4 years. It is the letterhead of his salvation, the mysterious firm that stepped in when his traditional credit lines evaporated and his financial world began to crumble. He lets out a harsh barking laugh that sounds more like a dry cough. He looks out at the audience, attempting to rally the crowd to his side, trying desperately to project the image of a seasoned executive dealing with a hysterical, confused child. "You are holding a public filing," Richard says, his chest puffing out again, as he clings to this final imaginary shred of his reality. Anyone can print a corporate disclosure form from the state registry. Vanguard Holdings is a premier private equity firm based out of Chicago. They manage hundreds of millions of dollars in aggressive growth portfolios. Their board of directors believes in my vision. They believe in Cameron. They have backed us for 4 solid years. You printing their logo on a piece of paper does not mean you have a single clue how high-level finance works. I do not stand up. Instead, I slowly lower myself into my chair at the sweetheart table. I smooth the heavy beaded silk of my white gown over my knees. I cross my arms and lean back, getting perfectly comfortable. It is a simple physical movement, but the psychological impact in the room is instantaneous and absolute. By sitting down, I force my father, my mother, and my brother to look down at me, yet I am the one presiding over them. The sweetheart table transforms into a judge's bench. They are no longer imposing figures of authority. They are defendants standing before a tribunal awaiting their sentence. The arrogance that defined their entire existence is rapidly dissolving into a panicked, frantic uncertainty. Gavin remains standing right beside my chair. He rests one large hand on the back of my seat, a silent, unmovable sentinel protecting my flank. Vanguard Holdings, LLC is not a premier private equity firm based out of Chicago. I say, my voice echoing clearly through the silent ballroom. It is a boutique asset management shell registered in Delaware. It does not manage hundreds of millions of dollars. It manages exactly one portfolio. Yours. Richard blinks. The words hit him, but his brain refuses to process them. He shakes his head, a rigid mechanical movement. That is impossible, my father snaps, though his voice lacks its usual booming thunder. I have spoken to their managing director. I have had conference calls with a man named Arthur Pendleton. He approved our bridge loans personally. He reviewed our quarterly statements. Arthur Pendleton is a third-party registered agent service. I pay $50 a month to forward my mail and answer a designated virtual phone line. I reply, watching the blood completely drain from my father's face. I hired an actor to read from a script I provided. You thought you were negotiating with a high-powered Chicago executive. You were actually negotiating with a retired voiceover artist sitting in a studio apartment in Florida, reading the exact terms and conditions I drafted from my laptop in my pajamas. Cameron lets out a sound that is half gasp, half sob. He grips the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it looks like he is staring at a ghost. No, Cameron whispers, his breath hitching in his throat. No, they loved my pitch deck. Vanguard loved my business model. They said I was a visionary. I look at my brother. I let my eyes trace the pathetic rented tuxedo and the heavy sweat pouring down his face. Your pitch deck was a joke, Cameron, I state, stripping away the very last illusion of his grandeur. It was a 20-page presentation filled with meaningless corporate buzzwords and fabricated market projections. You claimed you were building a revolutionary logistical software platform, but you did not include a single line of code, a single developer contract, or a single realistic revenue model. Any first-year business student would have laughed you out of the room. Any legitimate bank would have thrown your application in the trash. I lean forward, resting my elbows on the table, closing the distance between us. And that is exactly what happened, is it not? I ask, my voice dropping to a lethal, razor-sharp tone. 4 years ago, the traditional banks cut you off. You maxed out your credit cards. You drained the initial seed money mom and dad gave you. You went to every major bank in the city, and every single loan officer looked at your fabricated numbers and denied you. You were desperate. You were drowning. And then, miraculously, an anonymous angel investment firm called Vanguard Holdings reached out. They offered you a lifeline. They offered to fund your startup with minimal oversight and highly aggressive interest rates. You thought you were a genius who had finally been recognized. You did not realize you were stepping onto a financial landmine I set specifically for you. Linda places a hand against her throat. She is swaying slightly on her feet, the expensive fabric of her mother-of-the-bride dress trembling. She looks at the ceiling, then at the floor as if the room itself is collapsing inward. You funded him, Linda asks, her voice a hollow, breathy wheeze. You gave him the money. Why would you do that? I did not just fund him, Linda. I correct her, pulling another stack of documents from the manila envelope. Every loan Cameron took, every extension Richard begged for on the house, was approved by me. I bought your debt when the traditional banks cut you off. I purchased your second mortgage. I approved the cash infusions Cameron requested. I did it because I wanted to see exactly how far you would go to ruin yourselves. I wanted to see if there was any limit to your greed, any bottom to your delusion. I slide a thick stack of wire transfer confirmations across the table. They fan out perfectly, displaying dozens of transactions with heavy black timestamps. I watched you burn through capital. I say, my voice steady and unyielding. Every time you requested an operational expense draw from Vanguard, I approved it. And then I sat at my desk and tracked those exact funds as they bounced from Cameron's corporate account to a holding account in the Cayman Islands, and finally, to a VIP sports betting syndicate. You were not building a company. You were laundering my money to feed an addiction. And you, Richard, co-signed every single one of those commercial loans as the personal guarantor. Richard staggers backward as if he has been physically struck in the chest. He bumps into Cameron and the two men recoil from each other, suddenly realizing they are bound together in a trap of their own making. Richard looks at the wire transfers, his eyes scanning the highlighted routing numbers. The reality of his situation is finally crashing down on him with the force of a falling building. He has spent the last 4 years thinking he was a shrewd businessman, manipulating an anonymous investment firm to fund his son's empire. In reality, he had signed away his entire life to the daughter he had spent 3 decades treating like garbage. You own our debt, Richard whispers, the realization suffocating him. His legs give out and he collapses into one of the empty chairs set aside for the wedding party. He stares blankly at the floral centerpiece, his mind desperately trying to find a loophole, a technicality, any possible way out of this nightmare. There is none. I made sure of it. Linda begins to hyperventilate. The calculated theatrical crying from earlier is gone, replaced by genuine, unadulterated panic. She looks at me, her eyes wide, realizing that the comfortable, lavish lifestyle she loves so much is entirely in my hands. The country club memberships, the luxury cars, the sprawling house with the manicured lawn are all built on a foundation of debt that I control. You cannot do this to us, Linda gasps, clutching the edge of the table to keep herself upright. We are your parents. You cannot do this to us. We raised you. We gave up our best years to put a roof over your head. You cannot destroy your own family over money. You raised a scapegoat to deflect from your own failures, I say, cutting off her theatrical sobbing instantly. My voice is flat, hard, and devoid of any emotional vulnerability. You needed a punching bag. You needed someone to belittle and critique so you could ignore the fact that your favorite son was draining your bank accounts dry. You projected all of your financial anxiety, all of your incompetence, and all of your deep-seated insecurity onto me. You spent my entire life calling me a failure because you were too terrified to look at the massive gaping hole in your own lives. Linda pulls her hand away from the table as if the wood has suddenly turned white hot. She stares up at me, her mouth hanging open, the fake tears drying up completely when she realizes the audience is not buying her performance. The guests are looking at her with total revulsion. They see her exactly for what she is. You thought I was the weak link in this family. I continue staring down at her. You thought because I did not demand expensive cars or beg for bailouts that I was pathetic. You just did not realize the scapegoat was the one keeping the wolves from eating you. If you had just left me alone, if you had just walked into this reception, eaten your dinner, and gone home, this file would have stayed locked in my office safe. I was willing to let you drown quietly in the mess you created. But you had to come here and try to steal my home. You brought the wolves directly to my front door. Richard suddenly snaps. The terror gives way to blind, irrational fury. He refuses to accept total defeat. He refuses to be the man who lost everything in front of 200 influential guests. He slams his fist down onto the sweetheart table, making the champagne glasses rattle and the silverware clink against the fine china. He glares at me, his face turning an angry mottled purple. We still have our private investors. Richard yells, spittle flying from his lips. We do not need your house. We have venture capitalists who believe in our family legacy. They will bridge the gap. They will cover Cameron's losses and restructure the debt. You have exposed nothing but your own petty vindictiveness. I watch my father rant and rave, clinging desperately to his final imaginary lifeline. I wait for him to finish his tirade. I let the silence stretch out for a long, agonizing second, letting his hollow threats settle over the room. Then I reach into the very bottom of the manila envelope. I pull out a sleek black leather folder. It looks identical to the one they handed me an hour ago, but the contents are vastly different. I flip it open, revealing a stack of legally binding, notarized commercial contracts. You wanted to settle debts tonight, I say, looking directly into my father's defeated, hollow eyes. I slide the black folder forward. It glides perfectly across the table, stopping directly over the pile of Cameron's gambling debts. You demanded $380,000 for feeding me as a child. But according to these commercial contracts signed by all three of you as personal guarantors, you owe Vanguard Holdings $1.2 million. The sharp clack of my acrylic nail against the glossy paper sounds like a gavel striking wood. $1.2 million. I leave my finger pinned to the number, forcing my father's eyes to remain anchored to the exact sum of his ruin. The silence in the country club ballroom is absolute. 200 guests, including my father's golf partners, my mother's country club frenemies, and Cameron's supposed business associates, are holding their collective breath. The air is so thick with tension it feels difficult to inhale. Richard stares at the number. The black ink seems to pulse against the stark white page. He leans over the sweetheart table, his breath coming in short, ragged rasps. Linda makes a sound like a wounded animal, a high, thin, keening noise that she tries to muffle with her hands. Cameron simply takes a step backward, physically distancing himself from the documents, as if proximity implies liability. But the time for creating distance passed 4 years ago. I spent the last 48 months reviewing your financials, I say, my voice carrying effortlessly over the floral centerpieces. Every time Arthur Pendleton requested an updated balance sheet or a personal financial statement to maintain your credit line, I was the one auditing it. I know exactly how much equity you have left in your home, Richard. I know exactly what your retirement portfolio looks like after Cameron ravaged it to pay off his bookies. I know the exact limit on your premium credit cards. And I know that between the three of you, your total net liquid assets do not even scratch the surface of $250,000. You are functionally insolvent. Richard shakes his head violently, his face twisting into a mask of stubborn, desperate denial. We are not paying this. This is predatory lending. This is extortion. He turns slightly toward the audience, attempting to project his booming, authoritative CEO voice, trying to rally the crowd to his side. You manipulated us. No judge in this state will uphold these contracts when they find out the anonymous lender is my own daughter. It is a massive conflict of interest. You are trying to steal from your own family. I tilt my head, allowing a slow, freezing smile to touch my lips. I do not raise my voice to match his panic. I let the cold, hard facts do the cutting. There is no conflict of interest in a blind commercial loan, Richard. You applied for capital through a registered Delaware LLC. You willingly signed the personal guarantees. You accepted the exorbitant interest rates and the aggressive terms because no legitimate financial institution would touch Cameron's fabricated business model with a 10-foot pole. You were desperate, and desperate people sign things they do not read. I slide the second page of the contract out of the black folder. The heavy cardstock feels satisfyingly sharp against my fingertips. You certainly did not read Section 4, Article 9, I state, keeping my eyes locked on my father's rapidly paling face. The morality and fraud stipulations. Vanguard Holdings specializes in high-risk venture capital. To protect our investments, our contracts contain incredibly strict compliance clauses. If a borrower or any of the personal guarantors commits a felony, engages in financial fraud, or attempts to leverage unauthorized collateral, the loan is immediately classified as compromised. Cameron finally finds his voice, though it is thin, reedy, and trembling with terror. We did not commit fraud against Vanguard. We just tried to get a bridge loan from a local bank. We didn't touch your money yesterday. Gavin lets out a low, dark chuckle from beside me, the sound completely devoid of any warmth or mercy. He shifts his stance, his broad shoulders forming an impenetrable wall behind my chair. I do not break eye contact with my brother. You attempted to commit mortgage fraud using my stolen identity to secure capital for a company funded by Vanguard. I explain, speaking with the slow, deliberate cadence of a prosecutor closing a watertight case. You walked into a federally insured institution yesterday afternoon and presented forged documents to leverage an asset you do not legally possess. You triggered a priority federal fraud alert on a monitored Social Security number. That action constitutes a direct, undeniable breach of your commercial contract with Vanguard Holdings. The debt is no longer on a convenient long-term repayment plan. I press my hands flat against the table, sitting perfectly straight in my wedding gown. The entire balance of $1.2 million is now payable in full, immediately. Linda lets out a sharp, agonizing wail, her knees finally giving out completely. She collapses onto the polished hardwood floor, the heavy silk of her mother-of-the-bride dress pooling uselessly around her. She grabs the leg of the sweetheart table, burying her face against the white linen tablecloth, sobbing hysterically. She is begging now, her words muffled and incoherent, pleading with me to stop, pleading with Richard to fix it, pleading for the comfortable, lavish life that is currently burning to ash around her. But Richard is a man who has spent 30 years bullying his subordinates and intimidating his family. He refuses to bow. He straightens his spine violently, adjusting his expensive tie, puffing his chest out as he attempts to regain his dominant posture. He looks down at me, his eyes burning with a desperate, venomous arrogance. "You can't collect on that today." Richard scoffs, his voice booming across the room as he tries to rally his shattered dignity. He points a trembling finger at my face, reverting to the same dismissive, condescending tone he used when I was a child. "You think you are so smart, Justine? You think you have this all figured out because you passed an accounting exam. It takes months to call in a commercial debt like that. It takes lawyers, it takes court dates, it takes endless litigation. You have to file motions and wait for hearings. We have time to fight this. I will hire the best corporate defense attorneys in the state. I will drag this out in arbitration for 5 years. I will bleed you dry in legal fees before I let you take a single dime from my accounts." I watch him panting, his chest heaving with exertion and misplaced confidence. He truly believes he still has leverage. He believes the legal system is a slow, cumbersome shield he can hide behind, just as he has hidden behind his title and his expensive suits his entire life. He thinks he can out-litigate me, stall the process, and hide his remaining assets in offshore accounts before the courts can touch him. I reach into my beaded bridle clutch. My fingers bypass the lipstick and the compact mirror wrapping around the cool metal of my smartphone. I pull it out and place it gently on top of the Vanguard contracts. "You are thinking of a standard commercial loan, Richard," I say, my voice cutting through his bluster like a scalpel. "You are thinking of a fair, equitable agreement drafted by a traditional bank that has to play by standard regulatory timelines and offer grace periods. But Vanguard Holdings is a private entity, and you signed a highly specialized, ruthless contract designed by a senior forensic accountant who specializes in rapid asset recovery." I tap the screen of my phone to wake it up. The soft glow illuminates my face in the dim lighting of the ballroom. "You did not just sign a personal guarantee," I explain, watching the last remnants of false confidence drain from my father's eyes. "You signed a confession of judgment. It is a legal maneuver you would have caught if you had bothered to retain competent independent counsel instead of having Cameron review the documents to save a few $1,000s. A confession of judgment means you preemptively admitted liability. You waived your right to a trial. You waived your right to arbitration. You waived your right to due process. You legally agreed that upon a breach of the fraud clause, Vanguard Holdings could bypass the courts entirely and proceed directly to asset seizure. Cameron begins to hyperventilate, clutching his chest, his eyes rolling back slightly. He understands exactly what that means. His personal checking accounts, his remaining credit lines, his sports cars, everything is forfeit. Richard stands frozen, a statue of a man realizing the ground beneath him has already vanished into thin air. I unlock my phone. The screen displays a secure encrypted financial dashboard tied directly to the legal and banking networks I established years ago. I don't need months, I say, my thumb hovering over the screen. I do not need a judge. I do not need a courtroom. And I do not need a team of lawyers to bleed you dry. You gave me the keys to your entire financial existence the moment you signed that paper 4 years ago. You handed me the combination to the vault. I was just waiting for you to give me the legal justification to turn the lock. I tap a single button on the screen. The interface flashes green, confirming the execution of the command. Automated legal filings are instantly transmitted to the county clerk. Wage garnishment orders are deployed. Freeze commands are issued directly to their primary banking institutions. It is ruthless, instantaneous, and entirely legal. I lock the phone and slide it casually back into my clutch. I look up at the 3 people who spent my life trying to break me. I already executed the default. Check your email, Dad. Right on cue, a sharp mechanical vibration cuts through the absolute silence of the ballroom. The sound comes from the inner breast pocket of my father's tailored suit jacket. It is a harsh, relentless buzzing that seems to echo off the crystal chandeliers overhead. For a long, agonizing second, no one breathes. The 200 guests watching this spectacle remain entirely perfectly still, captivated by the live execution of a family empire. Richard stares at me, his eyes wide and completely bloodshot. He does not want to reach into his pocket. He knows with the primal instinct of a cornered animal that whatever is waiting for him on that glowing screen is the end of his life as he knows it. But the phone vibrates again, demanding his attention, ringing the death knell of his financial independence. With a hand that is shaking so violently he can barely control his own fingers, Richard reaches inside his jacket. He pulls out his smartphone. The screen is illuminated, displaying a cascade of high-priority automated alerts. He brings the device up to his face, his eyes squinting against the harsh backlight. I watch the exact second his reality fractures. The arrogant, booming executive who marched into my wedding reception to steal my home vanishes forever. The color completely drains from his face, leaving behind a sickly, grayish pallor. His jaw goes slack. His chest stops heaving and freezes mid-breath. The phone slips from his trembling, numb fingers. It clatters loudly onto the sweetheart table, bouncing off the heavy black binder they brought to intimidate me before sliding to a halt right next to my bridal bouquet. The screen remains lit, facing upward. It displays an emergency notification from his primary wealth management institution. The subject line reads, "Urgent Asset Freeze and Notice of Execution, Vanguard Holdings, LLC." You assumed this was a negotiation, I state, my voice projecting clearly and carrying absolute authority across the room. I do not look at his phone. I do not need to. I wrote the code that generated that exact email. You believe that because you wear an expensive suit and hold an executive title, you were insulated from the consequences of your own reckless greed. But the commercial contracts you signed with Vanguard Holdings were not standard bank loans. They were highly specialized, aggressive private equity instruments with zero tolerance for criminal exposure. I lean forward, tapping my manicured nail directly on the $1.2 million figure highlighted on the contract sitting in front of me. Because you attempted to commit mortgage fraud using my stolen identity yesterday afternoon, you officially triggered the strict morality and fraud clauses embedded in Section 4 of your Vanguard agreement. I explained, dissecting their ruin with clinical precision. A standard bank might give you 90 days to cure a default. A standard bank might send you warning letters or invite you to arbitration. Vanguard Holdings does not offer grace periods for federal crimes. The moment that Priority Fraud Alert hit the federal database, the Vanguard contracts automatically classified your entire portfolio as severely compromised. Cameron takes a staggering step backward on the stage, his hands gripping his hair, his breath coming in short, panicked wheezes. He looks at his father, waiting for Richard to fix it, waiting for the patriarch to wave his hand and make the bad numbers go away. But Richard cannot even speak. That $1.2 million is no longer on a convenient long-term payment plan. I continue shifting my gaze to my brother. It is not something you can chip away at with monthly minimums while you continue to lease luxury sports cars and buy expensive dinners to impress people who do not actually care about you. That balance is payable in full, immediately. Richard finally manages to draw a breath. He grips the edge of the table, attempting to push himself upright, attempting to regain the dominant, towering posture he has used to bully me since I was a child. He scoffs a wet, desperate sound that lacks any real conviction. "You cannot collect on that today," Richard gasps, pointing a trembling finger at the paperwork. "You are bluffing to scare us. It takes months to call in a commercial debt like that. It takes a judge. It takes a courtroom. You have to file injunctions and wait for a docket number. We have time to fight this. We will hire the best defense firm in the city. We will drag you through arbitration until you are forced to settle for pennies on the dollar." I look at the man who spent his entire life underestimating my intelligence, my drive, and my capacity for survival. I look at the man who came to my wedding reception not to celebrate my happiness, but to hand me an invoice for my own childhood. "You thought you were outsmarting a naive girl?" I say, my voice dropping to a lethal, freezing whisper that forces everyone in the room to strain to listen. "You thought because I sat quietly at Thanksgiving dinners while you mocked my career, because I did not demand expensive bailouts like Cameron, that I was weak. You assumed my degree was just a piece of paper, and my job was just pushing numbers around a spreadsheet. You never bothered to ask what a senior forensic accountant actually does. You never bothered to look past your own massive, suffocating egos." I pick up my own phone from the table, holding it up so the screen faces them. "But you handed over the keys to your entire life to a forensic accountant who specializes in asset recovery," I state, clearly shattering his final illusion of safety. "You did not sign a standard loan, Richard. You signed a confession of judgment. You legally waived your right to a trial, your right to arbitration, and your right to due process. You preemptively agreed that if you breached the fraud clauses, Vanguard Holdings could proceed directly to asset seizure without ever stepping foot inside a courtroom." I tap a single button on my screen, closing the secure banking portal I had opened earlier. "I do not need months," I say, staring directly into my father's terrified eyes. "I do not need a judge, and I do not need a team of lawyers. I had the execution orders drafted, notarized, and queued in the county clerk's digital filing system 6 months ago. I was just waiting for you to provide the legal justification to release them. Your attempt to steal my house yesterday was the final keystroke. I already executed the default." I point to the phone lying dormant on the table between us. "Check your email, Dad." Richard stares at the device as if it is an explosive ready to detonate. He does not move to pick it up. He knows that reading the details will make it real. He knows that the automated notices currently flooding his inbox are the receipts of his total destruction. The digital execution has already swept through the banking networks. I turn to the audience addressing the room, breaking down the exact immediate consequences of their arrogance. "As of 5 minutes ago, the asset transfer has legally begun," I announce, ensuring that every business partner and country club acquaintance in the room understands the absolute finality of this moment. The Uniform Commercial Code liens have been filed. The writs of execution have been electronically delivered to your primary financial institutions. Your checking accounts are frozen. Your savings accounts are locked. Cameron, the auto pay accounts tied to your luxury apartment and your leased vehicles are currently registering a zero balance. They will begin repossessing your cars by Tuesday morning. The Ponzi scheme is over. The charade is finished. You possess absolutely nothing." At table 5, my managing partner leans back in his chair, swirling his scotch glass, a look of profound, terrifying respect etched across his face. He knows the sheer volume of meticulous, unyielding paperwork required to orchestrate a digital takedown of this magnitude. He knows that I have just executed a masterclass in corporate warfare, and I did it wearing a wedding gown. Beside me, Gavin stands like a pillar of granite. He does not gloat. He does not rub it in. He simply remains an immovable force guarding my flank and allowing me the space to finish the job. His absolute silence is more intimidating than any shouting match could ever be. He is letting my family know that their reign of terror is permanently over and they will never be allowed to disrespect me again. Linda cannot process the information. Her brain, entirely wired to protect her social standing and her physical comforts, is rejecting the reality of her immediate poverty. She stares at Richard, waiting for him to unleash his anger, waiting for him to crush me with his authority and fix the problem. But Richard is empty. He is a hollow suit staring at a phone that has just informed him he is ruined. Linda's fake theatrical sobbing completely vanishes, replaced by a raw, primal panic. The blood drains from her face, her perfect makeup standing out sharply against her pale skin. Her hands begin to shake violently. She realizes that Richard is not going to save her. She realizes that the golden child on the stage behind them is entirely useless. She lunges forward, her manicured hands grasping desperately at Richard's tailored sleeve. She shakes his arm, her fingernails digging into the expensive fabric. "What does the email say?" Linda demands, her voice shrill, breathless, and completely stripped of its usual condescension. She shakes him harder when he refuses to look at her. "Richard, answer me. What does the email say? What did she do? Tell me what she did to our accounts." Richard slowly turns his head to look at his wife. His eyes are dead. The arrogant spark that defined their 30-year marriage has been extinguished. He opens his mouth to speak, to try and soften the blow, to try and explain that they have lost the war, but he cannot find the words. The magnitude of the failure is suffocating him. I do not let him answer. I do not let him maintain even a fraction of his patriarchal authority. I am the one who built the cage, and I will be the one to drop the guillotine. I lean across the sweetheart table, resting my hands firmly on the white linen, locking eyes with my mother. I ensure she hears exactly what she has lost. The family house in the suburbs. I answer for him, my voice completely cold, ringing with absolute finality. The one you just took a massive second mortgage out on to cover Cameron's gambling debts. The one you used to host your country club dinners and pretend you are better than everyone else. It belongs to Vanguard now. Linda's mouth opens and closes like a fish gasping for air on a dry dock. Her hands heavily adorned with platinum rings paid for by the equity of a house she no longer owns, claw frantically at the high lace neckline of her silk dress. The absolute reality of her impending homelessness is crashing down upon her shoulders, a physical, suffocating weight that forces her closer to the polished hardwood floor. She looks at me, her chest heaving, her eyes darting wildly as she searches for a shred of the obedient, desperate daughter she spent 3 decades molding. She finds absolutely nothing. The woman sitting across from her is a total stranger, a financial executioner who has systematically dismantled her entire universe. I maintain my gaze, holding her panicked stare with absolute icy stillness. I want her to fully grasp the absolute reversal of power in this room. The house where you kept my childhood bedroom as a storage closet for Cameron's golf clubs. I ask, my voice slicing effortlessly through the heavy, dead silence of the ballroom. The room you stripped to the bare floorboards the very day I moved out to college so your golden child could have a place to put his extra designer luggage, the home where you told me I was merely a guest who had to earn her keep. I am the legal owner. Linda lets out a strangled gasp, a sound so raw and ugly it makes a few guests in the front row flinch. She grips the table linen, her knuckles turning bone white, shaking her head in a rapid, jerky motion as if she can physically reject the words I am speaking. "And I am serving you your formal eviction notice right now." I state clearly, ensuring the microphone on the table picks up every single syllable and broadcasts it to the crowd. The deed was transferred to a holding trust, controlled by Vanguard, the exact moment the default was triggered by your husband. You do not own the walls, you do not own the roof, And you certainly do not own the right to stay. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property. I suggest you skip the cake cutting and start packing boxes. Cameron watches his mother collapse completely into a puddle of weeping silk. He looks at his father, who remains entirely frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the dark screen of his dropped smartphone. The realization finally penetrates Cameron's thick, entitled skull. His endless source of free money is permanently gone. The constant bailouts, the minimum credit card payments, the fraudulent bridge loans, the entire corrupt infrastructure he used to fund his pathetic charade of a life has just been incinerated in front of him. The terror that had gripped him just moments ago rapidly mutates into a violent, blinding rage. The golden boy, the visionary CEO, the beloved son who could do no wrong, is suddenly facing the terrifying prospect of getting a minimum wage job to survive. The realization that there will be no more wire transfers to Macau, no more VIP tables funded by his parents' stolen equity breaks his brain. He lets out a guttural roar. It is not the sound of a man defending his family. It is the sound of a parasite realizing the host has officially died. His face flushes a deep mottled crimson. The veins in his neck bulge against the tight collar of his rented tuxedo. He pushes off the edge of the stage, his polished dress shoes slipping slightly on the waxed floor, and lunges toward the sweetheart table with his hands outstretched, aiming directly for me. He does not make it within 3 feet of my chair. Gavin steps forward, his massive frame moving with startling, terrifying speed. He intercepts my brother effortlessly, planting a flat, heavy hand firmly against Cameron's chest. The impact stops my brother dead in his tracks, snapping his head back and knocking the wind out of his lungs with a sharp, audible wheeze. Gavin does not raise his voice. He does not need to. He simply glares down at Cameron, his eyes dark and promising immediate severe physical trauma if Cameron dares to take one more step forward. Prevented from physically attacking me, Cameron resorts to the only weapon he has left. You are a sociopath. Cameron screams, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his lips as he points a shaking finger over Gavin's shoulder. You are insane. You set us up. You destroyed your own family out of pure spite. You planned this for years just to ruin my life. You are a monster, Justine. I do not even blink. I watch his tantrum with the detached interest of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. You thought you were outsmarting a naive girl? I say, my voice remaining perfectly level, a stark contrast to his hysterical screaming. You thought, because I sat quietly at Thanksgiving dinners while you mocked my career, because I did not demand expensive bailouts, that I was weak. You assumed my degree was just a piece of paper, and my job was just pushing numbers around a spreadsheet. But you handed over the keys to your entire life to a forensic accountant who specializes in asset recovery. When Cameron realizes his screaming is having absolutely no effect on my composure, he pivots. He turns away from the sweetheart table and faces the 200 guests sitting in the darkened ballroom. He throws his arms out wide, gesturing frantically to the crowd, to the men in expensive tailored suits, to the women holding crystal champagne flutes. He expects them to rally behind him. He has spent his entire life coasting on his natural charisma, manipulating crowds, playing the handsome, misunderstood victim. Are you people blind? Cameron demands, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, desperate for validation. Are you just going to sit there and let her do this? She is stealing everything we have. Someone do something. Stop this insanity. He makes direct eye contact with Arthur, one of Richard's oldest golfing buddies, a man who has known Cameron since he was a toddler. Arthur slowly turns his head away, picking up his water glass and staring intently at the ice cubes, refusing to acknowledge my brother's existence. Cameron spins to the left, locking eyes with a venture capitalist he had spent the entire cocktail hour trying to corner for a pitch. The man explicitly steps backward, putting physical distance between himself and my brother, his expression tight with undisguised revulsion. The silence from the 200 guests is absolutely deafening. There is no murmuring of support for the Wilson family. There is no outrage directed at me. They have seen the bank statements gliding across the table. They have heard the undeniable clinical proof of a decade of fraud, theft, and gambling addiction. They stare at Cameron with the cold, detached disgust, usually reserved for something foul scraped off the bottom of a shoe. The total, absolute rejection from his peers snaps the final thread of his sanity. He is entirely alone, exposed, and utterly bankrupt. Panicking Cameron whirls around, his eyes wild and frantic, as he searches the room for anyone who will take orders from him. He lunges toward the edge of the stage, grabbing the heavy metal microphone stand with both hands. His knuckles are white, his face contorted in a panic so extreme it borders on mania. "Security!" Cameron yells into the microphone, his voice blasting through the speakers with a desperate screeching feedback that makes the front row wince. "Where is the venue staff? Get the manager out here right now. Throw her out. Throw her out of her own wedding." The sharp metallic screech of microphone feedback pierces the air, a high-pitched squeal that forces the guests in the front row to physically wince and cover their ears. Cameron is clutching the heavy metal stand of the stage microphone with both hands. His knuckles are completely white. The veins in his neck pulse against the stiff collar of his rented tuxedo. He is a man watching his entire fabricated reality burn to the ground, and his response is to throw a spectacular, unhinged tantrum. "Security!" Cameron yells, his voice cracking with a manic, desperate edge. His chest heaves, soaking his dress shirt in a cold, terrified sweat. "Where is the venue staff? Get the manager out here right now. Throw her out. Throw her out of her own wedding." I remain seated at the sweetheart table. I do not flinch. I do not break my posture. I simply cross my legs beneath the heavy silk of my gown and watch my brother unravel. Beside me, Gavin crosses his massive arms over his chest, his face carved from pure stone, silently daring anyone in the room to step forward and assist the screaming man on the stage. No one moves. The 200 guests seated in the darkened ballroom are completely paralyzed. They are witnessing the live, unedited execution of the Wilson family empire. These are people who worship social status and financial stability. They have just spent the last 20 minutes listening to forensic proof that the wealthy, successful family they came to celebrate is actually a syndicate of frauds, thieves, and gambling addicts. They stare at Cameron, not with sympathy, but with an icy, clinical revulsion. He is a leper begging for a lifeline, and the high society crowd turns its collective back. Cameron realizes no one is coming to his aid. He points an aggressive, shaking finger directly at my face. "You are a sociopath!" He screams, spittle flying from his lips, entirely abandoning any pretense of professionalism. "You set us up. You destroyed your own family out of pure spite. Cancel the catering. Shut off the music. I want the bar closed immediately. I am paying for this reception, and I demand that you shut it down." The heavy oak double doors at the far end of the ballroom swing open. The sound is thick and absolute, cutting through Cameron's hysterical ranting. "Mr. Sterling." The general manager of the estate steps into the room. He is a man of impeccable standards, dressed in a flawless charcoal suit, a discreet earpiece coiled neatly behind his right ear. He does not look panicked. He does not look rushed. He moves with the calm, terrifying precision of a man who has managed billionaires, politicians, and royalty. Flanking him are 4 massive security guards in matching black suits. They move in perfect unison, their heavy boots making no sound on the thick carpet. The crowd instantly parts, pulling their chairs in to create a wide, clear path for the venue staff. Cameron's chest puffs out. He spots the uniforms, and a wave of delusional relief washes over his face. He actually believes the cavalry has arrived to rescue him. He believes his status as a wealthy white-collar executive will protect him from the consequences of his own actions. He lets go of the microphone stand and points toward Mr. Sterling. Finally, Cameron barks, snapping his fingers in the air as if calling a stray dog. "Sterling, get your men up here right now. I want this woman and her husband forcibly removed from the premises. They are trespassing. They are harassing the guests. I am the primary host of this event, and I am officially canceling the reception. Get them out." Mr. Sterling stops at the base of the stage. The 4 massive security guards fan out behind him, creating an impenetrable wall of muscle between the wedding guests and my family. Sterling does not look at me. He does not look at the guests. He focuses his absolute undivided attention on my brother. The manager's face is a masterclass in professional disdain. It is the specific chilling expression reserved for a guest who has mistaken a five-star establishment for a cheap motel. "Cancel the catering, sir?" Mr. Sterling asks. His voice is smooth, perfectly modulated, and effortlessly amplified by the acoustics of the ballroom. "Yes," Cameron screams, slamming his hand against a nearby speaker. "Cancel the food, cancel the premium open bar, cancel the floral contracts. I am revoking my authorization. Throw them out onto the street." Mr. Sterling slowly shakes his head. He adjusts the cuffs of his suit jacket with a practiced, elegant flick of his wrists. "Sir, you cannot cancel an event you have not funded." Sterling states, the words dropping into the silent room like lead weights. "You do not possess the authority to shut down a single light bulb in this building." Cameron freezes. His mouth opens, but the air seems to catch in his throat. He blinks rapidly, his mind scrambling to comprehend a reality that contradicts everything he believes about his own importance. "What are you talking about?" Cameron demands, his voice losing its thunder and dropping into a confused, defensive stammer. "I handed you my platinum card yesterday afternoon for the final $50,000 deposit. I paid for this room." Sterling offers a smile that contains absolutely zero warmth. It is a razor blade masquerading as a polite gesture. "Yes, sir, you certainly did present a platinum card yesterday afternoon," Sterling confirms, speaking clearly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "And that card declined." A collective audible gasp ripples through the crowd. In the circles my mother and father run, in financial failure is embarrassing. But a publicly declined credit card is an absolute unforgivable social death sentence. I watch Linda flinch, as if she has been physically struck. She presses her hands over her face completely, unable to process the humiliation radiating from the stage. Cameron turns a deep, bruised shade of purple. He shakes his head frantically, pointing at Sterling. "That is a lie. It was a bank error. I gave you my corporate account card right after that." "You did," Sterling agrees smoothly, taking a single step closer to the stage. "And your corporate card returned a code 03. Insufficient funds." You then produced two personal debit cards, both of which were flagged by our merchant terminal as frozen assets. You spent 45 minutes at my front desk shouting at my concierge staff, demanding we run the cards again, completely unable to produce a single functioning line of credit. The absolute destruction of Cameron's facade is complete. He is entirely exposed. He is not a wealthy tech visionary. He is a broke, desperate fraud begging for credit he does not have. He stares at the venue manager, his jaw trembling, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit signs. "If my cards did not work," Cameron breathes, his voice barely a whisper, "then why are we here? Why is the room booked? Why did you serve the food? Who paid for the deposit?" I lean back in my chair. I do not say a word. I let the silence stretch out, allowing the sheer weight of the impending revelation to settle over my father, my mother, and my brother. They had spent the last year bragging to every single person in their country club about how they were funding the wedding of the century. Linda had loudly complained to anyone who would listen that she was forced to step in and pay for the Grand Plaza because her pathetic, unambitious daughter could never afford such a venue on an accountant's salary. They claimed ownership of the night. They claimed ownership of my happiness. Mr. Sterling looks at Cameron with sheer, unadulterated pity. "You have not contributed a single cent to this evening, sir." Sterling says, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "Your attempt to pay the final deposit yesterday was a completely unnecessary transaction. We simply humored your request to swipe the cards because we were explicitly instructed to document your financial insolvency." Sterling turns his body slightly, gesturing with an open palm toward the sweetheart table where I am seated in perfect, serene silence. "Mrs. Justine paid for this entire venue," Sterling announces to the crowd. "She covered the massive catering budget, the premium open bar, the luxury floral arrangements, and the staff gratuity. She paid the entire balance in full, in cash, 6 months ago." Richard's head snaps up from his phone. He stares at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying, crushing clarity. The realization hits him with the force of a freight train. I did not just trap them with the Vanguard contracts. I orchestrated this entire evening. I let them play host. I let them invite their pretentious friends. I let them boast and preen and act like royalty, knowing full well they were dancing in a cage I bought and paid for in hard currency. They were nothing but the clowns I hired for my own private circus. Linda lets out a ragged, choking sob. She realizes the truth. The lavish wedding she had used to elevate her own social standing was actually my weapon. Every bite of food, every sip of champagne her friends enjoyed was paid for by the daughter she spent 30 years calling a worthless failure. The humiliation is absolute and irreversible. She will never be able to show her face in this city again. Cameron slumps against the microphone stand, his knees buckling slightly. He has absolutely nothing left to say. There are no more lies to spin, no more fake investors to blame. He is a hollow shell of a man, publicly dismantled by the sister he thought was an easy target. Mr. Sterling dismisses Cameron from his line of sight entirely. He turns his back on the stage, treating my brother like a discarded piece of trash. Accompanied by his 4 massive security guards, Sterling walks directly up the center aisle. He marches past the staring guests, past the frozen accounting partners, and past the weeping, broken form of my mother. He stops precisely 2 feet in front of the sweetheart table. He squares his shoulders, straightens his posture, and delivers a deep, perfectly executed, respectful bow. It is an acknowledgement of absolute power, a validation of the sheer tactical brilliance required to pull off a financial execution of this magnitude. Sterling rises from his bow and looks directly into my eyes. He completely ignores the wreckage of my family bleeding out on the floor behind him. "Ma'am, the true payee of this venue instructed us to remove anyone causing a disturbance." Sterling says, his voice perfectly calm and awaiting his final order. He gestures slightly toward the stage and the floor where my parents are sitting in ruins. "Shall we escort them out?" "Yes, please," I say, my voice steady and ringing with absolute clarity. "They were just leaving." Mr. Sterling gives a crisp, abbreviated nod. He raises 2 fingers in a silent practice command. The 4 massive security guards immediately step forward, moving with synchronized military efficiency. They form a tight semicircle around my parents and my brother, physically cutting them off from the sweetheart table and entirely blocking their access to the rest of the ballroom. Richard is the first to be addressed. A guard steps directly into his personal space, gesturing firmly toward the exit doors at the back of the room. Richard tries to puff out his chest, attempting to summon the ghosts of his former authority, but the movement is hollow and pathetic. He points a trembling finger at Mr. Sterling, trying to project the image of a powerful CEO rather than a bankrupt fraud. "You will be hearing from my attorneys." Richard snarls, his voice cracking under the strain of his ruined pride. "I am going to sue this establishment for every dime it is worth. I will have your job for this. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I will drag you through the courts for wrongful eviction and public defamation. The threat is completely useless, and everyone in the room knows it. I just provided undeniable forensic proof that my father does not have the funds to pay a retaining fee for a junior paralegal, let alone a team of corporate litigators." Mr. Sterling does not even blink. He simply stares at my father with an expression of polite boredom. "You are welcome to direct all legal correspondence to our corporate office, sir." Sterling replies smoothly. "Now please proceed to the exit before we are forced to involve local law enforcement." Richard looks around the room, searching desperately for a single sympathetic face among his golfing buddies and business associates. He finds absolutely none. The men he has spent years trying to impress are actively looking away, sipping their drinks, and avoiding eye contact with the newly destitute executive. With a harsh, defeated exhale, Richard turns and begins the long walk down the center aisle. He tries to keep his chin up, trying to project the image of a man leaving on his own terms, but his shoulders are slumped and his steps are heavy with the absolute certainty of his financial demise. Linda is entirely incapable of such restraint. As a guard steps toward her, the reality of the Vanguard eviction notice finally short-circuits her brain. She realizes she is losing the country club, the luxury cars, and the sprawling suburban estate she uses to judge everyone else. She recoils, her hands flying up in a panic. Her carefully applied makeup is a smeared running mess of genuine terror. "Justine, you cannot do this!" Linda screams, her voice echoing shrilly off the vaulted ceiling as she abandons any pretense of dignity. She tries to push past the guard, reaching her manicured hands out toward me, like a drowning victim grasping for a life preserver. "I am your mother. You are my flesh and blood. Family loyalty means something. You cannot throw your own mother out onto the street. We gave you life. You owe us." I look down at the woman who spent 30 years weaponizing her affection, turning every interaction into a transaction, and constantly reminding me of my supposed inferiority. I feel absolutely nothing. There is no guilt, no sorrow, and no hesitation. The emotional tether she spent my entire life fraying has finally snapped completely. "You forfeited the right to invoke family loyalty the moment you tried to steal my future to fund his gambling addiction," I reply, my tone as cold and unyielding as a steel vault. "I owe you exactly what you handed me today. An invoice. Consider it paid in full. Goodbye, Linda." A second security guard steps in, taking Linda firmly by the elbow. She thrashes against his grip, wailing about her social status and her reputation. She is practically dragged backward, her designer heels scuffing against the polished floor, her theatrical sobbing filling the silent room. She looks pathetic, completely stripped of the artificial elegance she used as a weapon her entire life. That leaves Cameron, the golden child, the supposed visionary CEO, who has just been exposed as a broke, desperate fraud begging for free capital. He is trembling, his face flushed a violent shade of red. He looks from the Vanguard documents on the table to the security guards closing in on him. He realizes there is no bailout coming from his parents. There is no secret account to drain. He is entirely out of options, and his source of endless cash is gone forever. A guard places a heavy hand on Cameron's shoulder, gesturing toward the doors. "Time to go, sir," Cameron snaps. He violently shoves the guard's hand away, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He refuses to accept the humiliation of being escorted out of a room he claimed to own just minutes ago. "Do not touch me," Cameron roars, spittle flying from his lips as he points an aggressive finger over the guard's shoulder, aiming directly at me. "You planned this. You set us up from the beginning. You are a sociopath, Justine. You destroyed this family out of pure spite. You are nothing but a jealous, vindictive little accountant who couldn't stand seeing me succeed." He attempts to lunge forward, trying to bypass the security line to reach the sweetheart table. It is a monumental mistake. The guards, highly trained and entirely out of patience, react instantly. Two of the massive men step forward, grabbing Cameron by his bespoke suit lapels. They hoist him slightly off the ground, entirely nullifying his momentum and rendering his anger useless. Cameron thrashes wildly, kicking his expensive Italian leather shoes at the guard's shins, screaming at the top of his lungs. He demands that the guests step in. He demands that someone stop this insanity. He demands that the universe bend to his will one final time. But the universe has firmly corrected its course. The guards do not indulge his tantrum. They physically drag my brother backward down the center aisle. He looks like a petulant toddler being hauled out of a toy store. His rented tuxedo jacket rides up around his ears. His tie is skewed. His expensive watch glints under the chandeliers as he flails his arms. The high society guests pull their chairs in tighter, moving their silk dresses and tailored suits out of the way to avoid any physical contact with the screaming fraud being dragged past their tables. I watch him go. I watch the golden child, the man who drained my parents' retirement and attempted to steal my identity, get hauled out like a common trespasser. The security team reaches the back of the ballroom. They push Cameron through the exit, following closely behind Richard and Linda. The heavy, ornate oak double doors swing shut behind them. The solid brass latches engage with a loud, incredibly satisfying click. The heavy wood slams shut, leaving the toxic family on the outside for good. The silence in the ballroom is absolute. For a long moment, nobody moves. The 200 guests sit entirely frozen, processing the sheer magnitude of the corporate and emotional execution they have just witnessed. They came for a wedding reception and received a masterclass in forensic accounting and scorched earth asset recovery. The air is thick with shock awe and a healthy dose of pure intimidation. With the room finally free of the tension that plagued my entire life, Gavin moves. He steps out from behind my chair, his massive frame shifting with relaxed, easy confidence. He reaches down and picks up the heavy microphone stand that Cameron had knocked over during his initial panic. Gavin rights the stand, adjusts the microphone, and tests the audio with a gentle tap of his finger. He turns to face the stunned but captivated audience. He does not look angry. He does not look stressed. He looks like a man who has just watched his wife conquer the world, and he is entirely here for the victory lap. Gavin reaches up and casually straightens his silk tie, shooting me a quick conspiratorial wink. "Well," Gavin says smoothly, his deep, resonant voice effortlessly filling the massive ballroom. A wide, brilliant smile breaks across his handsome face. Now that the trash has taken itself out, who is ready for cake? The delivery is absolutely flawless. The tension in the room shatters instantly. For a split second, there is a collective intake of breath, and then the entire ballroom erupts. It starts with a booming bark of laughter from the senior partners at my accounting firm seated at table 5. They begin clapping, standing up from their chairs. The applause spreads like wildfire. Within seconds, the entire room is on its feet. The applause is massive, deafening, and entirely genuine. It is a standing ovation for the bride who refused to be a victim, for the accountant who outsmarted the con artists, and for the woman who finally reclaimed her own life. The DJ, possessing impeccable comedic timing and reading the room perfectly, immediately cues up an incredibly upbeat, brass-heavy funk track. The music blasts through the speakers, instantly transforming the atmosphere from a tense courtroom tribunal into a vibrant electric celebration. The heavy, suffocating energy that my family brought into the room has been completely exorcised. The air feels light, crisp, and charged with absolute joy. The catering staff, taking their cue from Mr. Sterling, seamlessly flood the floor. They carry massive silver trays loaded with fresh champagne flutes, circulating among the cheering guests. People are laughing, raising their glasses toward the sweetheart table, toasting to my absolute victory. I sit back in my chair, sinking into the plush upholstery. I let out a long, slow exhale. The tension that has been coiled in my neck and shoulders since I was a teenager finally permanently unravels. I feel lighter than air. I feel untouchable. Gavin sets the microphone aside and takes the seat next to me. He picks up his champagne flute and holds it out. I pick up mine, the crystal clinking softly against his. We do not need to say a word. The look in his eyes conveys absolute pride, total support, and unconditional love. We drink to our future, a future entirely free from the parasitic grasp of the Wilson family. I look out at the crowded ballroom. I do not see the people who abandoned me. I see my real family. I see the friends who supported me through college when my parents cut me off. I see the colleagues who mentored me and helped me build Vanguard Holdings from a tiny shell company into a forensic weapon. I see Gavin's parents who have treated me with more warmth and genuine affection in 3 years than Linda and Richard managed in 3 decades. They are standing near the dance floor, smiling widely and raising their glasses in my direction. This is my chosen family. This is the life I built with my own 2 hands. I look down at the sweetheart table. Scattered across the pristine white linen are the remnants of my family's destruction. The bank statements, the betting ledgers, the Vanguard contracts, the federal fraud alerts. And sitting right in the center next to my bridal bouquet is the single piece of paper that started this entire confrontation. The invoice. $380,000. The itemized bill for my childhood food, clothing, and shelter. The pathetic, delusional attempt by a bankrupt man to extort his own daughter to save his fraudulent empire. I pick up the piece of paper. It feels incredibly flimsy between my fingers. It holds absolutely no power over me. It is just ink and delusion. I hold it up, gripping the top edge with both hands. With a single sharp motion, I rip the invoice cleanly in half. I place the 2 halves together and rip them again, reducing the fabricated debt into meaningless quarters. I open my hands and let the pieces fall. They drift softly down toward the polished hardwood floor, mixing with the scattered rose petals and the glittering confetti from the grand entrance. The paper lands silently, completely buried under the physical evidence of my new untouchable beginning. The past is officially shredded, swept away by the music and the laughter of a room full of people who actually care about me. The wolves have been slaughtered, the empire is mine, and the rest of my life starts right now. Justine's journey serves as a masterclass in navigating toxic family dynamics. The profound truth at the heart of her story is simple, yet incredibly difficult to accept. Shared DNA does not entitle anyone to your peace, your sanity, or your hard-earned success. For decades, Justine's family manipulated, marginalized, and completely underestimated her. They viewed her quiet resilience as a weakness and her financial independence as an insult to their manufactured status. But Justine understood a crucial principle of survival: you never have to announce your moves to validate your worth. While her parents and brother constructed a fragile house of cards built on debt fraud and boundless arrogance, she meticulously built an impenetrable fortress of financial literacy and unshakable self-respect. The greatest takeaway here is that your value is never defined by the people who actively refuse to see it. When dealing with manipulative relatives who cast you as the family scapegoat, engaging in emotional arguments is entirely useless. They will continuously gaslight you, diminish your accomplishments, and drain your resources if you grant them access. The ultimate victory is not found in a screaming match. It is found in silent, undeniable preparation. Justine reclaimed her life not by throwing a tantrum, but by letting her family's own unchecked greed become the architect of their absolute destruction. Financial, emotional, and psychological independence is the ultimate shield against exploitation. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can do is lock the door on the people who drag you down and celebrate your freedom with the family you actively choose. Share your own story in the comments below about a time you took your power back from toxic relatives who underestimated your worth. If Justine's ultimate triumph resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your life and establishing unshakable boundaries.